I'm Autumn Lockett.
And this is Mitch Randall.
And you're listening to Good Faith Weekly.
Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Autumn and I are going to catch up on the road in Raleigh, North Carolina. And then we're going to talk a little bit about President Volodymyr Zelensky's speech to the United States Congress. And then later on in the pod, Autumn and I had the distinct pleasure of sitting down with two European Baptist pastors to talk about what's going on in Ukraine and the refugee response all across Europe. It's a really good episode, so stay tuned.
Rainforest, volcanoes, coastlines with crystal blue water, fresh fruit and seafood. Join Good Faith Media for an immersive experience on Hawaii's Big Island. Discover brilliant night skies with our friend, astrophysicist Paul Wallace. Explore and have fun with your small group of adventurers. Join us May 21st through the 28th. Learn more at faithexperiences.org.
Autumn, how are things? We are on the road in Raleigh, North Carolina.
We are. It's a little bit strange to be sitting in a brand new place, and we have some of our coworkers nearby. We are going to be covering the CBF North Carolina General Assembly.
That's exactly right. So we're here among friendly faces, and we're excited to be celebrating with the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship here in North Carolina. It's going to be a great meeting, and probably going to conduct some interviews while we're here. So hopefully we'll be bringing those to our audience next week on next week's episode. Well, Autumn, it was a pretty heavy episode this week. You and I sat down with two very remarkable Baptist pastors. One is the General Secretary of the European Baptist Federation, Alan Donaldson, and the other, Daniel Trusiewicz, is a Polish Baptist pastor, and they both talked about what was going on in Ukraine, a little bit about the situation there, and then also the relief efforts that are being conducted all across Europe. It really was, at least for me, a learning experience. But they just did a wonderful job explaining what was going on, and we're continuing to pray for the Ukrainians and that peace would prevail, and all of the other Europeans who are reacting in such a Christ-like manner.
They are, and we completed these interviews over the past few days, and at the same time, the news is reporting of news anchors who are being killed in the line of duty. And I'm listening to Alan and to Daniel talk about relief efforts going into Ukraine, and just they are literally putting their lives on the line right now.
Yeah, I mean, in our interview with Alan, he talks about being close to the border there in Poland and watching refugees cross over. And within, 20 miles of that location, the Russians unloaded some bombs there. So they're getting closer and closer to other European countries in their violent attack and invasion of Ukraine. Well, we're recording this on Wednesday for our drop on Friday, and today we got to hear President Zelensky give an incredible speech to the United States Congress, a joint session, both the Senate and House coming together. And President Zelensky just continues to be an inspiration to the entire world. People are referring to him as a modern day Churchill. And, I can't disagree.
I think Churchill should be so lucky, personally.
But he's just doing an outstanding job. His call for peaceful skies, no-fly zone, but he also understands the complexity of that ask. And while he has to ask and while he hopes for a no-fly zone across Ukraine, he also understands that any type of conflict between the West and Russia might end up in World War III. And so he's asking for missiles to protect the skies in Ukraine, and called directly on President Biden as not only the leader of the United States, but the leader of the free world to act and to help the Ukrainian people overcome this aggressor. And President Zelensky's just doing a marvelous job maneuvering through all of the complexities while at the same time being inspirational for his people and for his troops as they stand against this aggressor.
Yeah, he really is. And I think it's Alan who talks about Zelensky mentioning that where Russia treads, freedom dies. And I think he was, when Zelensky addressed Congress, he was really using those freedom type buzzwords that America, I mean, it makes us want to sing the Star Spangled Banner, right? I mean, this is what we're all about. And so I'm just so hopeful that we can continue in a movement toward peace.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to cut a brief introduction today because these two interviews are quite lengthy, but they are certainly worth your time and listening because these two men are on the front lines working in their congregations, doing remarkable work as refugees continue to flood over the border from Ukraine into Poland and to other European countries. So stay tuned for this interview that Autumn and I sat down with General Secretary from the European Baptist Federation, Alan Donaldson, and Polish Baptist pastor, Daniel Trusiewicz. It is something you're really going to hear.
Marvel at Pacific Coast wells. Wonder in rainforests. Explore wild coastlands and towering cliffs. Join Good Faith Media for a unique and immersive experience in the Pacific Northwest and Olympic National Park. Enjoy engaging conversation with your small group of adventurers led by our team, which includes a journalist, historian, and theologian. Join us July the 23rd through 30th. Learn more at faithexperiences.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got our guest is from the European Baptist Federation, General Secretary for EBF, Reverend Alan Donaldson. Alan, we want to welcome you to Good Faith Weekly, but would certainly like to have you back under better circumstances. So hope all is well. You're in Amsterdam right now, but welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back on Good Faith Weekly again. It's been a few months since I've been here, so glad to be back and sharing your concern for Ukraine just now. It's not good circumstances. Life changed for all of us a couple of weeks ago, and we're just desperately praying that the Lord will be somehow in all of this and will turn this around, the situation around. It certainly needs a miraculous transformation out there.
Well, Alan, let's kind of set the stage for what's going on in Ukraine right now. I had the privilege of attending the EBF annual meeting a few years ago in Lviv. And I know that Tony Peck, who was the General Secretary back then, and Elijah Brown, who was the General Secretary, still is General Secretary for the Baptist World Alliance, actually went out east where some of the conflict and cultural tensions were arising. Can you help Americans kind of understand what has been going on in Ukraine and the eastern side of the country that has led up to this Russian invasion?
Yeah, certainly. For some people, they will say war started just a little over 2 weeks ago. But if you're Ukrainian, you talk about the war starting in 2014 when Russia took over Crimea. And I think formally it was put that groups took over Lugansk and Donetsk region. They were certainly supported by Vladimir Putin. And they moved into those areas, they annexed them, and they began running those states very much in a sense as if they were Russian lands. And you're right, some of our Baptist leaders went there after the Lviv Ukrainian Council to see for themselves what life was like in those regions. And Ukrainians would say that was the start of the invasion. And obviously 2 weeks ago, things changed and the invasion began on almost every front, in the north to the east, and also from Crimea in the south into the heartland of Ukraine.
Yeah, I can remember back at the EBF meeting in Lviv, after the meeting was over, I went into the town and walked through some of the beautiful cathedrals that Ukraine has to offer. And I was surprised that in each cathedral that I went into, and again, this is years ago, there were shrines to the soldiers who had died from that area in the Eastern conflict. And so I want to set the stage that while the war has been going on for 2 weeks right now, this conflict has been going on for years, and it's been leading up to this invasion by Russia. So Alan, how is the attitude right now in all of Europe? Um,
It's a really good question, that, Mitch. The attitude in Europe depends on where you stay. So if you are a citizen of Moldova, which is very near Crimea, you have a suitcase packed. It is in the boot of your car or the trunk of your car, if I'm speaking to
Thank you for
American
translating.
audience. Yeah, in the trunk, and you are ready to go at the sound of the siren. Because you believe that if the invasion increases in Ukraine, that you are next. Moldova is obviously not in NATO, and so they are ready to flee across the Romanian border. But right now, Ukrainians are fleeing to Moldova and finding safety there, and then some are moving over into Romania as they scatter around Europe. If you're in Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, and Poland, you are in reception mode. You are receiving 2.5 million refugees so far. Poland has 50% of them at least coming through their country. And you are welcoming these refugees. You are supporting their onward movement throughout Europe and around the world. And you are playing host. But you are also at the same time looking across the border and wondering, where will Russian invasions go next if they are successful in Ukraine? And if you're a little country like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, you probably believe the Russians could invade you in a matter of 24 hours and your army would have no chance. And you will be relying on your NATO status to protect you. And you're not quite sure if that's going to work.
That was my next question. How is the general sort of feeling about NATO's response to this? Because it's mixed here.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that it's mixed here as well.
Okay.
We recognize, I think, widely that if NATO responds any more firmly than it has by putting either troops on the ground or clearing the skies above Ukraine, that the chances are we escalate towards the dreaded Third World War.
Yes.
And that there is the potential for nuclear escalation. And so there is amongst many people a sigh of relief that NATO is not going to the protection of the Ukrainians. But of course, the Ukrainians are desperate for it.
Yeah.
They always speak of how glad they are to receive the weapons that they have received from NATO. There's now talk about Polish airplanes being passed around and eventually ending up in Ukrainian hands for them to protect their own skies, which they believe if they can protect the skies, they can hold the capital and hold the nation. So it's a very mixed picture here about the NATO response. Right now, the focus in government is on the humanitarian response, but I suspect if you're a citizen of Ukraine, you're also longing for a better military response.
Yes.
You know, Al, looking at this historically, Europeans cannot help but compare Putin's invasion of Crimea and the Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine with what happened prior to World War II and Nazi Germany's basically annexing of other countries' lands of German-speaking lands. Is there a real fear? Do you think that fear is justified that we're looking at the potential, if we are not careful, of a quick escalation of another European war, which would obviously turn into another world war.
There is the fear of that. I think as long as NATO stays out, folks are fairly calm that it will not escalate in that direction. But the question will be, how long can NATO stand by?
Yeah.
And not NATO, but the rest of the world. It doesn't just have to be NATO. How long can the rest of the world stand by and watch what is now being described by some as a genocide? By watching the flattening of cities around Ukraine, watching the escalation today into new cities that hadn't experienced any bombardment up to now, but are now experiencing it. The question is, how long does the world stand by and allow that to happen to a nation that was a nuclear nation and was promised that the world would protect it if it gave up its nuclear arms? So there is a contract there, and there was a deal made, and the dilemma is to what extent they are protected.
Well, Alan, let's move into Ukraine itself. For those of us who live on the other side of the pond, so to speak, we have been incredibly inspired by the Ukrainian people, led by their president, President Zelensky. It has been something to behold the resolve and just outright defiance of Russian occupation. I mean, we're all sitting over here and our hand, just praying for them, but also just captivated by their response to this. Can you give us a little bit of sense? I mean, you've talked to Ukrainians, Ukrainian Baptists, and you've been in contact with them for the last couple of weeks, well, even more so, but more so the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what we're witnessing in the Ukrainian people?
So most of my contact is with Ukrainian Baptists, but I was in Poland just 10 days ago and was meeting Ukrainian people who were coming across the border. That meant I was meeting women and children. And in the refugee center, I did what all former youth workers know what to do. I picked up a table tennis bat and I stood at the table until I was joined by a few teenagers from Ukraine, and we smiled and we laughed. And I don't have any Ukrainian, and more uncomfortably, I have a tiny amount of Russian, which I was being determined not to use under the circumstances. And so we played a little bit of ping pong backwards and forward, and you suddenly realize I'm playing table tennis with boys who left their dads behind 24 hours ago, 36 hours ago. And they left their dads behind to go to war. And here they are in a refugee center playing table tennis with a strange man, maybe the same age as their dad, from Scotland, who can't speak their language, but is just smiling and trying to welcome them. And I was amazed by their resilience. These young lads played table tennis, they played bar football, they drew their younger siblings alongside, and they distracted them from the realities that they were facing. And these young lads were supporting their mothers who were traveling and taking the family to safety. And that was heartbreaking to watch. It was heartbreaking to reflect on. But the resilience of these young adults was incredible. And to realize, had they been 2 years older, they wouldn't have been coming across the border.
Right.
But they would have been going to fight in the war, as most of the adult population in Ukraine has done. And with no military service, they take up arms to defend their nation. But in the Baptist churches, we also see this resilience. And we see this resilience married with great grace, great humility, and a desire for God to be glorified in their reactions to the war in their nation. And it becomes overwhelming to see people willing to lay down their life in humanitarian response. And so we have already heard of a 26-year-old man who brought his wife to safety in the west of Ukraine and then returned back to the borders of Kiev to help in the local Baptist church to take people to safety from the shelter they were receiving there, and lost his life in a shell attack. And that type of servanthood is ingrained in everything that they are saying and doing right now. We have most contact with Lviv in Western Ukraine, where 100 people are being looked after in church basements. And we have 15 church basements with 100 people in them. So 1,500 people being looked after in these basements by the Lviv Baptist community. We've got 165,000 euros into Ukraine already. The banking system is not working, so it literally is finding people who can take that money in. But that money is going a long way because, believe it or not, in Lviv at least, once refugees are getting there and they start to be fed by the churches, they are also offering from their own money to pay for the food. So it costs €5 a day or $5 a day to feed a person who's in a church bunker living. And the Ukrainians themselves are offering, on average, €2.50 towards the cost of that food. They're actually in the dignity of the people as such that they're offering to pay. I met Ukrainians who had crossed the border into Poland and were staying in the Polish Baptist Seminary building, about 40 of them. 2 of them were older men in their 60s, and they wanted to just give back. And they were out in the garden of the seminary, sweeping up leaves, picking up branches from the storms a couple of days before. And by the end of the afternoon, the seminary garden was just sparkling in the sunshine, thanks to these 2 Ukrainian men who were giving back to those who were giving to them. It's been remarkable.
Wow. And that's sort of the gist of what we're getting about the Ukrainian people from their response to this situation. The last time we talked with you, Alan, we were discussing yet another giant tragedy going on, which is the pandemic, and the way that the network of Baptists in Europe has approached that and has come alongside faith leaders through this crisis. And I remember you talking about how you were really impressed by the way that you could get together groups of Baptists who always have opinions about things. I will just tell you, famously so, right? But because they could see this greater cause, they were really able to come together. And from what you're describing, it sounds like that's happening again.
That is most definitely happening again. It's been overwhelming. The European Baptist Federation have been asked to run point on the Baptist global response. So we have an organization called the Baptist Forum for Aid and Development, which is a cooperative of many Baptist organizations around the world who do aid and development. And when something like this happens, they pull together. So within 24 hours, a meeting was scheduled. Within 36 hours, that meeting had been held. We had the Ukrainian Baptist leaders as part of that meeting to explain what their need was. We had the Baptist leaders from the neighboring nations explaining what their need was. And together, 36 hours after the first bombs were fired, the Baptists around the world had given 250,000 euros pledged from each of their reserves to go immediately to the relief work. And the Baptists on the ground in Poland, in Romania, in Hungary, in Moldova, in Slovakia, were already at work. Within 12 hours of war starting, the Hungarians had the first van of aid on the way to Ukraine. They were over the border by midnight on the first day. By the next day, they had hired a warehouse in Ukraine ready to run their supplies around the whole of Ukraine from. It was remarkably fast. There was a pastor in Poland who used his own money to buy 30 camp beds and put them in his church. 36 hours after war started, he phoned me and said, Alan, I've got 16 people staying in my church tonight from Ukraine. By the end of our call, he said, Alan, I've got 32 people staying in my church tonight. When I visited him 4 days later, he had 350 people staying in his church that night, 300 on beds and 50 on chairs. And already he had moved on about 500 people from his shelter to other shelters. There's now 40 in Poland. The community response of Baptists around the Ukrainian region and then around the world to support them has been colossal. I think today we've just reached the €1 million mark in giving towards the care of refugees inside and out with Ukraine. This weekend, it will hit our churches bigger than ever, and I suspect the giving to go through the roof for this humanitarian need that is there. And we are just privileged to play a small part of kind of being the organization where the money comes through in order to reach the people who are in need.
I will just say, watching the news out of Ukraine has been very heavy. It's, we over here have the option to not watch sometimes. And I just have to say, sometimes as a mom of 4, I have to just turn it off because it just feels very heavy. And we also are talking to a lot of people about what church it is. And this is what church is. People talk about how church is changing, but throughout history, church has been there. And I just hope we can all keep our eyes on what this should be and really follow the example that you all are setting.
Thank you, Autumn. And if you want to see what church is, you need to look at what the Ukrainians are doing. So they're meeting in their basements for worship morning and evening every day. They're inviting those who believe to join them. They're inviting those who don't believe to join them. There's no compulsion. You get a bed, whatever. You get your food, whatever. But there is a time for prayer. There is a time for reflection. There is a time for baptisms. We're hearing of baptisms happening in the basements of these churches. We heard of 4 people who came to faith for the first time this past Sunday at a communion service in the basement of a Baptist church just outside Kiev. We've heard of weddings that have happened. We've even heard of a mother who gave birth in the basement of the Baptist church because no ambulance could get through. And the other women in the community just rallied round and became the midwives, as always used to happen in the past.
Yes.
And that mother and baby are doing well today. So they are being church. They are finding the place of worship in the reality of pain and destruction all around them. That worship is key to what allows them to keep on going, but it hasn't stopped the mission of God either. And so they're demonstrating the mission of God in love, in kindness, and in gospel proclamation, and in the celebration of communion and baptism. And in all of that, in its most holistic form, we see the mission of God going forward in Ukraine.
Well, Alan, we really appreciate you giving us your time today. Our prayers go out to the Ukrainian people, all the leaders there in Ukraine and across Europe. We appreciate everything that European Baptist Federation is doing. So those of us in the States who want to help the European relief effort, what can we do, Alan, to help and stand beside you and our fellow Ukrainians?
Well, the Ukrainians would tell you to pray that God will be glorified in everything that they do. So we repeat that wherever we go. Please pray for the Ukrainians, pray for peace in that land, pray for justice for that land, and pray that the witness and faithfulness of God's people would have an impact on the future of that nation. But please also give. I believe in the States, it's straightforward. You can go to the Baptist World Alliance's website and you can donate directly there. You can even get your tax refund sorted through that as well. So your giving goes a bit further. And that would be the most straightforward way. They are making regular transfers from the US dollar over to the euro so that we can then pass it into Ukraine and to the nations roundabout. So there is a direct route for giving there.
Great. Well, Alan, we really appreciate it. Before we let you go, we're going to let Autumn ask our final question, as she's asked all of our guests over 110 times now. But for some reason, this seems very poignant and very meaningful, more so than any time we've ever asked it at Good Faith Weekly. So, Autumn, I'm going to let you ask Alan our final question.
Yes, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is there's more to tell. So we would love to know what your more to tell is today.
My more to tell today is the pastor who preached in Ukraine, in Kiev, on hope last Sunday. And he gave packets of seeds to his congregation. And he told them to go plant them when they got a chance and to wait for the harvest that would come. And that picture of hope, that's overwhelming. The trust that God would bring a harvest in the nation.
Mm-hmm. There's an old Mexican proverb that says, they tried to bury us, they didn't know we were seeds. And it sort of circles back to that. It's just beautiful. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah. Well, Alan Donaldson from European Baptist Federation, thank you once again for spending time with us. Again, we are all praying for the situation in Ukraine, that peace will prevail, and that God will be glorified. And as spring is right around the corner, all across this northern hemisphere, we pray that sunflowers will bloom and that brighter days will be ahead for everyone. So, thank you, sir, for joining us this week.
Thank you. God bless you all.
We're going to ask our audience to stay tuned. We're going to be back with another guest here really shortly as we continue our conversation about the situation and war in Ukraine. We'll be right back.
Check out Good Faith Reads, a short podcast from Good Faith Media about our books. Conversations with our book authors, tips on writing a book, unique angles on good faith and book publishing. We've got dozens and dozens of episodes. Good Faith Reads. We release 2 new episodes each month. Learn more at goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got another very special guest all the way from a European country. Daniel Trusiewicz is a Polish Baptist pastor living in Wroclaw, Poland, and he and I got to know each other a couple of years ago when I attended a European Baptist Federation meeting, and he is an outstanding pastor in Poland. And Daniel, we welcome you to Good Faith Weekly.
Thank you very much, Mitch. It's my pleasure to share this time with you.
Well, Daniel, as you know, 3 weeks ago, at the bequest of President Vladimir Putin of Russia, Russian troops began an invasion of your neighbor, Ukraine. Up to this point, as this interview is being conducted today, 2.5 million refugees have left Ukraine and have fled to border countries such as Poland. So just the first question we want to ask you, can you describe the situation in Poland in regards to the refugees arriving?
First of all, in our country, we have been very open to have Ukrainian people, and we have had them for the last 8 years, because when the crisis in Luhansk and Donetsk started in 2014, many Ukrainians started going to Poland. Most of them were simply economic migrants. Only some were refugees, those who came from Luhansk. But so we have known them, and we have also liked those people because they helped our economy. So maybe about 2 million Ukrainian people already were in Poland before this war, when Putin invaded the whole of Ukraine. So, but now, yes, we have at least almost 2 million more in our country. And I think the Polish people are really open, even though it's difficult for us, because there are crowds in the train stations, and also we We see that our churches are open. For example, in my church, First Baptist Church of Wroclaw, we have at least about 100 refugees. So every corner is with beds, except for the sanctuary, and we cook meals for them, and we give shelter. So it's more or less in most of our churches like that. I mean, Baptist churches. I'm not sure about other churches, but also the government is helping. The Ukrainian people can be registered. They don't need visa to come here, and also they also have permit to stay for 1.5 years.
Mm.
We just spoke to the General Secretary of the European Baptist Federation, Alan Donaldson, and last week he was actually at the Polish-Ukrainian border, evaluating the situation, talking to local Baptist pastors in that area. Now, you live a little further away from the border, but what we understand is that these are waves of refugees that are continuing to flow across the Polish border. When did the first refugees arrive in your area, and are you still seeing more and more refugees coming into your city?
In our city, we started having Ukrainian refugees about in the first week of the war, which was more than 2 weeks ago, and they continue coming. The biggest wave was, of course, in eastern Poland. There is one church in Chełm, which is only 20 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. They even had to lay people on the floor in the sanctuary. There were so many of those refugees. And also the restaurants were providing food, and all the hotels, any sort of place where people could be could find shelter. They opened for the refugees. Of course, some of them are just for a couple of nights, and then they go further. But in our city here in Wrocław, most of those who are with us in our church, they are somehow related to the people who are already here, who earlier came, and they prefer to stay in our country until the war is over. And but also we try to send some of them across even to Western Europe.
Yeah.
So the world has been marveling at the resolve and resilience of the Ukrainian people. However, they've also been really inspired by the generosity of the Polish people. Why do you think Polish people have responded so generously to this situation?
It's, I think, because of war, mainly. But the other reason is that it's not, we have known Ukrainian people and we have been friends with them. There has been good friendship, I think, from all our neighbors. I think Ukraine is now our closest neighbor, and especially I think also what is important. I think what Polish people are doing now to Ukrainians. I think nobody did for us when the Second World War started in 1939. And I think we simply still remember, at least the older generation, or we know this from stories, that it's so important to help the people who are in danger, who actually save their lives. They have to find some help. So I think this costs us, of course, but I think it's not difficult to pay this cost for us. And also we have a lot of sponsors who give us food, restaurants or shops. We have a lot of volunteers who come to our church, and they help whatever needed. So this is, I think, simply sympathy, human sympathy, but also God's love, which we share. with
Yes,
the others.
Love that.
absolutely. So, what are some of the immediate needs of the refugees that you all are caring for right now?
The immediate needs are food, shelter. I think also children. Most of those are coming, those mothers with children, so they need the children go to school,
Mm,
and the mothers, they also want to find some jobs so that they can earn money. But our government provides like a pocket money to the adults, and also they provide um, social help to children. Every child can get something like 120 euro per month.
okay.
Um, yes, for as long as they should be here. And I think this is great help to them. So it's actually very encouraging to see that that uh, there is such a great solidarity in our nation uh, to help the people in need.
Hmm.
Daniel, that is actually really remarkable and something that I have not thought of as of yet. We're 3 weeks into this war, and refugees have been flooding over the border, finding themselves in Polish cities, and even I mean, with after 3 weeks, with the women and children primarily being the refugees who are coming to the country, with the men staying behind in Ukraine and fighting for their freedom, that the Polish government and communities are already starting to think about education for these children, trying to set a routine for them instead of just letting them set in a refugee center or a rescue center for hours on end. They're really starting to think about the mental, emotional, and intellectual well-being of these children and their parents. That's just outstanding. Something I didn't even think about, but I'm so glad to hear about it.
Hmm.
Mm. Yes, I think this is important because, of course, it's not so easy because the Ukrainian language is a little bit different than Polish, and it's easier to understand each other, but the writing is different. We use Latin alphabet in Poland, and they in Ukraine they use Cyrillic alphabet, but I think the children are very well accepted in our schools, and some of them may have even Ukrainian teachers because some of the women who came from Ukraine, they are teachers and they can find jobs in the schools, in our schools. So there is this opportunity also. So I think uh, uh, it's really helpful to children, and I think this is the least what we can give to them, because we cannot give them permanent peace, which could be only in their country. So we try to provide something that is temporary here for them, and of course we pray and try to do whatever we can so that Ukraine should win this war, because I think this is crucial, um, to be invaded like that in such a vicious and really atrocious way. I think this is they deserve to win, and I think the international community should help as much as we can
Hmm.
to them. And I'm glad to hear that there are sanctions on Russia, and I hope they will be effective.
Well, Daniel, I appreciate you bringing that up because that's exactly what I want to talk about next. First of all, I'm just so thankful for the incredible generosity and love that the Polish people are showing to these Ukrainian refugees who are coming into your wonderful country. I mean, that is just inspirational in itself. And the world rallies around you and the Ukrainians to help them in their time of need. But I do want to spend a little bit of our time together talking about the situation in Ukraine and the Russian invasion. Now, you are a resident of Poland. And the Polish people must be drawing some similar parallels with the German invasion of Poland before World War II that actually launched the Second World War. When these autocrats, such as Hitler and Putin, began to annex other countries based upon ethnic identities, it becomes very alarming. And we have drawn those parallels here at Good Faith Media of how these invasions begin and then begin to multiply. What is the attitude right now in Poland as they see their neighboring country being invaded with the history that Poland has prior to World War II?
For us in Poland, it's very clear that the invasion is not to say in a very softly illegitimate, but is real. It's in fact it's very brutal because the Russians they kill civilians, they bomb cities. They use all the sorts of weapon which is forbidden by the Geneva Convention, and they are really brutal. They want to humiliate the nation of Ukraine, and they really but they cannot do it because the Ukrainians are really they resist in a marvelous way. They are very brave people. They fight against. They defend their territory. They fight against the Russians, and also they have a lot of small victories. But still, we hear that that there are attacks from Russia, and so this is not fair. So in Poland, we sympathize very much, and we support Ukraine, and we want very much that Ukraine is going to win this war, because I think they deserve. If they win, with also the support and solidarity of all three countries, I think that will be unprecedented victory over such an invader, aggressor like Russia. We can only compare this to what they do in Ukraine. It's like in what ISIS did in Iraq, in Syria, in those places where they wanted to actually eradicate everything and level down with the earth whatever has been achieved by free people. So I think this is what President Zelensky from Ukraine said. Wherever Russia troops come, the dreams die. I think this is symbolic.
Very
because,
well said.
The people of Ukraine, they love freedom, and they have the right to be free like any other nation. But wherever the Russian army marches, the dreams die.
Yeah. So do you see a path out of this, and what does that look like?
I pray for the victory of Ukraine. I think many people do, and we think it is possible. It's not immediate, but at some point, I think there will be. They would have to sit down and talk about peace. So my prayer is that this will happen as soon as possible, but it takes some time until the brutal invader from Kremlin can understand that he has come to the wall, and there is no way for him but to sit down and talk with about peace. So we pray that that there will be a plausible solution found, and that Ukraine will remain free. So, but um, that's what we desire. But the future will show what will happen. I think we also sympathize with people who are suffering, and there are already thousands of civilians who died in this war, and not speaking about the other loss, material loss.
Right.
Only today I heard that Ukraine has already been lost with about 120, I think, billion, they said, euro material worth. But of course, this can be reconstructed. But the people who lost their lives, they cannot be resurrected. Yeah, unfortunately.
Sure. So, Daniel, our audience at Good Faith Weekly is primarily Americans. And so we are looking across the ocean to the European response and are inspired by it and want to help in any way we can. Obviously, our government is issuing sanction after sanction against Russia. Hopefully, that puts on a lot of pressure on them. But the American people, and in particular American Christians, want to help the Polish in their effort to reach out to these refugees. What can Americans do to help the Polish response or the overall European response to the situation in Ukraine?
Yes, first of all, pray. All the people who are Christians should pray. We believe that God hears those prayers. And by praying, we also motivate ourselves to do some sort of action. Certainly, you can, your people, American people who love freedom, can also help to Ukrainian people. What is most needed, I think, is lots of things, but probably the easiest would be to give money to organizations that your people trust. There are different organizations, of course, government and also non-government. Non-government is, for example, European Baptist Federation. There is a lot of help going on through EBF, and also there are other organizations. I know that our Union, Baptist Union of Poland, is also providing much help to Ukraine. What is now most needed is food in Ukraine, canned food, rice, noodles, flour, things like that can last for a long time, and they should be transported. Of course, fuel is needed because in Ukraine nothing is produced now. Everything should be brought there. So there are also drivers are needed who are brave enough to drive, for example, from Poland to Ukraine to deliver those goods. So this is, I think, what is most needed for the people who are now in Ukraine. Besides those who are already in Poland, they are taken care of quite well. But we need to support the fighters who are in Ukraine. And also, I think the majority of the population still there in Ukraine. only like maybe 2.5 million left. But Ukraine is a big nation.
Yeah.
They have 44 million. So those people need, the shops are empty now in places where the Russians invaded. They rob all the shops, and they also shoot the people. So people are often afraid to go out. So they need to somehow there should be. But of course, there are some like humanitarian corridors created in some places, and through those corridors, some help may go. But it needs to be brought by people from outside who are brave and who know how to do it.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for that encouragement. And we are certainly going to get the word out here in the United States that our listeners can look at a lot of these organizations. We have talked to the Baptist World Alliance with their Baptist World Aid Program and the European Baptist Federation. As I said a moment ago, we just finished interviewing Alan Donaldson, the General Secretary there, and he gave routes for our listeners to be able to help in that effort. And we just want to say thank you to you personally and your church there in Poland, all the incredible generosity that you are showing the Ukrainian people. We have been heartbroken and inspired at the same time watching this situation unfold in Ukraine. So, Daniel Trusiewicz, thank you so much for joining us at Good Faith Weekly. Our prayers are with you, the Polish people, and especially the Ukrainian people. But before we let you go, Autumn's got one last question to ask you before we sign off.
Our tagline at Good Faith Media is there's more to tell. So now that we have talked to you and sort of had your perspective of what is happening on the ground as Poland renders aid and home and safety to the Ukrainians, what is your more to tell?
Yes, I think I can be grateful for the international bonds which we have. So I think this is in the time of crisis, in the time of need, this really pays off, and we can see now that our relationship, faith relationship among Baptists worldwide through Baptist World Alliance and through the European Baptist Federation, it's so now helpful because we trust each other, we know each other, we love each other, and we can help each other. I regularly hear reports from Ukraine, from Igor Bandura, who is vice president and from of the Baptist Union there, and from Valery Antoniuk, who is the president. But Igor speaks English, so he might be better known in the English speaking world. But this is I'm so grateful, and I see that our relationships, our faith relationships, our faith bond is really doing the good work, and we can see good results, good fruit. So thank you, and God bless you also. We are divided by the ocean, but we are united by faith in Christ.
There
Amen.
you go. What a way to end. Daniel Trusiewicz, thank you so much for joining us at Good Faith Weekly. Our prayers and our thoughts are with you, and just keep doing the great work you're doing. You're inspiring all believers around the world, my friend.
Thank you. Let's keep praying for peace in Ukraine.
And to our listeners, we want to thank you for joining us at Good Faith Weekly. It's been a very heavy episode, but we continue to pray for the Ukrainians and that peace will prevail, that they would remain safe. We also want to pray for all of these incredible caregivers in all of these countries, including Poland and the surrounding countries who are giving aid to the refugees. Our heart continues to break, but we are hopeful that peace can prevail. And we beseech you, O God, to bring peace and to send your peace upon this world. Until next time, folks, keep praying for Ukraine and keep living good faith.